I interviewed you just at the point where Musk was in the process of buying Twitter. In fact, I think he was trying to get out of it, but then he sort of was forced to go through with it. And when we talked about what his motivations might be, I don't think either of us, or certainly I could never have anticipated that he would use it to basically become one of the big power players in British politics. That's obviously not his only aim, but it is something that he's done.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And the range of chaos going forward seems as unpredictable as that going backwards. I don't think any of us would have guessed that he would be widely credited with winning Trump the election. I don't think any of us would have anticipated that he'd throw this spanner in the works with this, as the last caller mentioned, this prospective donation to the Reform Party. And the fact that still today he's espousing the idea, which is beyond fringe in UK politics, of releasing Tommy Robinson and treating Tommy Robinson as a political prisoner. He's not just trying to move the Overton window towards a slightly more right of centre. He's moving politics and attempting to move politics to the extremes of right wing that I don't think we've comfortably seen in British politics in the last 50 years.
And why do you think that is? In a sense that he's not always been in that space politically. I mean, he was a Democrat until not so long ago. I mean, what do you think? I mean, it's so hard to say, or to hazard a guess at, but what do you think where this has come from, where the motivations are?
It's really hard to get into the mind of this guy, because this is someone who not only is the wealthiest man in the world, and the Tesla stocks have been going up dizzyingly in the last 6 weeks. His wealth is going up and up. So not only is he extraordinarily wealthy, but he seems intent on putting himself right in the centre of a lot of chaotic discussions. At the moment, the whole of X is awash with this idea that he's living out a life as an alter ego. And he's doing live broadcasts, or this alter ego is doing live broadcasts every night. And it's just a degree of chaos that's so hard to then rationalise, to try and work out what his motivations are, because he
makes Trump look quite like a rational actor. I mean, Trump is stable by comparison almost to Musk. It's got to that point.
Very similar to Trump in a lot of ways, in the sense that you remember during Trump's administration, he was in the news every day and he loved being in the news. I think Musk loves being in the consciousness in that same way.
And we're all plugged into his brain. I mean, if anyone who's still on Twitter, as I sort of kind of have to be, just about, although I don't use it as much as I did, but it's like now it's got to the point, it's totally different to when you were there, but now, because, anyone who's on it will recognise this, you go on the For You section, which is the default, and it's basically just his tweets. And it's like being plugged into his brain. It's like nothing we've ever seen before.
Yeah, and it raises a really big question, because I guess, the thought of him giving £100 million to a political party here, I guess it's quite overt influence. But even if you were to say, well, other countries don't allow foreign bodies to gift money, maybe we prohibit that. But still, he's the biggest account on X, and his tweets are his right to express his opinion. And the fact about 10% of his tweets right now are about the UK is not something that I think would even fall within regulatory control. It's not something that you could very easily say, well, that seems like it's subverting the discourse in our country. It's his right to do it. So it's a very difficult challenge for Keir Starmer, I think, and the Conservative Party, actually.
Why do you think he's become so interested in British politics? It wasn't something that anyone really saw coming. You can understand why he's become so involved in American politics, given much of his business is there. Why do you think he seems to have become so agitated by British politics?
A lot of the suggestion is that he doesn't appear to get a lot of sleep, and you can track a lot of the tweets that he sends, that if he spends most of his time in Texas, a lot of his tweets about UK politics start 5 a.m. Texas time, but when probably his timeline is pretty full of British commentators. And so that's one suggestion, that he's just finding himself...
He speaks English, and we speak English. It's the same language, exactly, right? That. So we're uniquely exposed. He's quite interested in German politics, but not to the same extent.
No, although he's endorsed the far-right party in Germany, which again is just completely bizarre from someone who runs a consumer electronics business. He runs a car company. One of the interesting things right now is people driving Tesla cars have seen the brand that they thought they were buying into move from something that felt quite progressive, quite green, quite forward-facing, and now it's like this insignia of someone who's red-pilled and fallen down the internet rabbit hole.
Do you think... it's quite interesting. The government... since the riots, where this kind of really started his kind of attacks on Britain and Starmer, and the government responded quite forcibly then. Since then, I think really until today, the government have been trying not to punch back too hard. I think their view has been to try and not go, particularly since the election. And it was clear that Musk was going to be so influential with Trump that they've not wanted to be too pugnacious towards him. But today they've come out much more strongly again against him. What can they do? Because it is subverting British politics, isn't it? It's having a huge impact on British politics daily. It's becoming harder for the government to actually establish a narrative on anything or try and actually make some progress on anything, because the whole media, people will criticise us for this, but I think it's fair, become very interested in what he's got to say because he's such a rich and influential person.
It's a difficult one, but I think the first thing we've got to do is separate the platform and the person. So there's one thing which is, can the platform be regulated? And that was relatively successful in Brazil, where Brazil felt that there was so much misinformation, they wanted action taken on it. And we all witnessed, I think Brazil banned X for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and that was relatively successful.
Cheers rang out through Rio de Janeiro. People managed to get back to their real lives again. Wonderful.
A lot of meme accounts went down for a couple of weeks, but so that was relatively successful. But even if we did that, like I say, he's got 220 million followers on the platform, and aside from regulating the platform, we've also got his own behaviour to regulate, and that I think is a harder problem to deal with. He seems intent at the moment on focusing on not only the grooming story, but also on the fact that the Online Safety Act is coming into force in March, and he seems to be focused on that. Actually, the work of the Conservative government, the previous Conservative government, but he seems really focused on that and the impact that might have on him. I don't think there's an easy answer to this, though. He's certainly intent on trying to bring the influence he had on US politics to the rest of the world.
Do you think that there is a difference between, say, and sometimes people make this comparison, sometimes people say, well, look, in a way, maybe Musk is just a kind of, 21st century version of the kind of press barons of the 20th century, right up to and including Rupert Murdoch. They tried to influence particular parties. They might not have always given money, but they were obviously hugely influential in terms of the discourse. Do you think it is analogous to that, or do you think it's different?
It's certainly quite tabloidy, isn't it? It's certainly the idea. It's got parallels with when Calvin Mackenzie, as the editor of The Sun, turned both barrels on you. It's adjacent to that. It's also having a disruptive effect, though, across the whole of the tech world. And what we've seen is that, tech oligarchs, these people with supreme wealth and power, typically hadn't used their power politically. But we're seeing a realignment of that. The attendee list of people going to Mar-a-Lago in the last month has included the CEOs of Apple, Amazon, of Meta.
There's been a fusion, basically, between politics and
absolutely
the MAGA element of the Republican Party.
The departure of Nick Clegg from Meta to be replaced by the guy who, until then, Joel Kaplan, until then was famous only really for sitting in the front row of the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation. And at the time, that
used to work for George W. Bush.
Absolutely.
The Republican
but
Party.
it was quite sort of polarising with inside Meta, because it felt like they were trying to, an individual there was appearing to take a side. Now that seems very mainstream, and so he's shifted the whole discourse about politics and power away from this sort of laissez-faire, stay in the background, to everyone wants to be the main character.
And why do you think it is that there has been this drift in Silicon Valley and the tech world? Because as you say, it is interesting. Largely, they may have been broadly identified, maybe with the Democrats, sort of vaguely progressive. To the point, of course, that, Meta, under Nick Clegg, banned Trump from the platform in the wake of January the 6th, 4 years ago. But there has been this shift, both towards, it seems, the Republican Party and to getting more involved in politics. Why do you think that is?
Trump's nature is he likes picking favourites. He likes choosing people. And I think Clegg's association with that ban was one of the first things that they wanted to get rid of. Trump has been on the record saying that if Mark Zuckerberg interfered in the election, he would put him in jail. And so everyone is fearful that Trump is going to pick favourites and that they're going to be on the wrong side of the fence. And so as a result of that, the expediency they're all showing is thinking, well, let's abandon the niceties that maybe we had previously and try and align ourselves or get close to him. Look, there's some problems ahead. One of the biggest conflicts is very evidently the businesses that make consumer products in China Apple, Tesla, are going to find themselves really sort of running straight on into these discussions about tariffs.
Protectionism.
Yeah, that's right. Is there going to be the ability to achieve an accord between what Musk wants with China and what Trump is rattling his saber for? And I think if we look down the line, there really can only be one main character in this. Right now, it's Musk, because Trump owed him something. But once Trump's in power, I wonder if that dynamic is going to change.
Do you think they'll fall out?
It's very difficult to not look at the characters involved. And, Musk falls out with a lot of people, Trump falls out with a lot of people, and not to perceive that either one of them is going to have to subjugate what they're looking for.
Do you think Musk would be willing to do that? Because it feels to me like that's the only way it endures, maybe, that if Musk is willing to be slightly supplicant to Trump over the long term. Do you think he'd be willing to? Has he ever done that with anybody?
Certainly he's moved his opinions, hasn't he? He was very proud in saying that he'd voted for Biden the first time round. He'd given money to Biden. He feels that the political mainstream has moved rather than he's moved. So there is sort of I think a sense that he might reinvent, but he's a very strong-headed character, and it's going to be an interesting challenge.